here is Ming Ouhyoung, who has probably come as far as almost, well, maybe not as far as Australia, but he's come from Taiwan.
Yes, yes.
He is the elder statesman of our three speakers, and we won't finished in 1990.
Yes.
Now, many of us heard stories about the Sarkos arm living under the floor when we were here. I see some nodding heads. Ming actually worked with it. And one of his problems was that it had a mind of its own, and they would go run demos, and people would come in, and this robot arm, with a lot of force, would just be swinging back and forth, and it freaked out the visitors. A little known fact about him. The other is that when he graduated, worked for Bell Labs for a while, went back to Taiwan, and was part of one of the first, if not the first, software startup in Taiwan, and it is still on the stock exchange.
Yes, yeah.
So we welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I can see that most of you are actually my friends during the early 1990s, so or late 80s. So I'm relaxed here to give a technical talk. Before I give the talk, I would like to say something here. When I returned in the early from 90 to 91, returned back to Taiwan, tried to teach computer graphics and virtual reality. Then I was shocked to see that the environment there in Asian countries such as Taiwan, Japan, and Singapore, the environment is not so good as compared to here. So I was having trouble just to have, for example, very good frame buffers, the true color display system, and not to mention the head-mounted display and the idea of virtual reality. So that's far away. I'm glad to say something here that after 25 years of struggle, those Asian countries finally set up the equipment that's almost equal to what has been taught here. Good. Now, what happened? Okay. Okay. So the motivation of my talk here. Every day we have billions of photos being stored in the Facebook and in other in our personal cameras and so on. And the trouble is that every day we download a lot of our photos by perhaps just by putting the time and perhaps the location into a folder, and that's all. Have you ever done anything else to do that, like making a comment? I don't think we have the time. Not to mention that when you have good memories, say 10 years ago, about a trip to to China, to India, to Europe, and you are having trouble to look at the pictures and especially try to locate the good ones. So the basic steps is to record the images by time, by event, by people, or by visually pleasing features. So several years ago, I tried to have research on this problem, and talking about the visual aesthetics in photos. Is it possible to learn something by computer algorithms? So we try to use the computational approaches to measure aesthetics. The challenge is that it's a completely or extremely subjective task. We're talking about art. So there are several approaches. The first one is so-called photograph assessment. The second one is called photograph enhancement. That is, we try to enhance a certain part of the photo or features. In terms of photograph assessment, we can use features to define it. The other way is that we try to re-rank the photos according to each individual's preference. That is, we consider each person has his personalized idea of a photograph. So the order of ranking is different from from the other person's order of ranking. So this is my approach. When I was in UNC Chapel Hill, in computer graphics, there are two approaches. One is the graphics algorithm itself. The other one is to provide better user interfaces, such as progressive refinement of radiosity and trackboards, head-mounted display, and gesture recognition, and so on. And so when I was trying to focus on this research topic, I tried to bring the new user interface into this area. That is, we try to consider the so-called personal preference in this topic. How do we know that a photograph is good or bad? There are many features. I just skip some of the slides here. Use features extraction algorithm. We can label them, and we can do prediction. And so this is so-called a binary classification problem. Low-level features of photograph. I believe all of you know the majority of them. Pointers, maybe. Yes. Low-level features such as intensity, color, saturation, hue, size and aspect ratio, and depth of field, the rule of thirds, and so on. Those are the common rules. And we can also classify the photographs by the simplicity of it. And also the blurriness of a photograph, and also the low-level features such as contrast and brightness. Therefore, we can classify the features as, for example, the rule of thirds, simplicity, color harmony, clarity, lighting, and so on. The other way is for the feature enhancement is by cropping, but I just skip over this one. Okay, so we talked about many features. So the first step is so-called feature extraction. Then we are going to use the user interface approach. Okay. Our feature descriptors include high-level and low-level image descriptors, such as low-level image descriptors such as contrast, intensity, color, and high-level features such as simplicity of the photograph, the focus, depth of field, and color harmonization. And we try to consider the personal preference into our evaluation. Well, this is actually a table of all the features that can be used in our feature extraction. This is a very simple one. We can locate so-called the region of interest from this photograph. It's around this area. And rule of thirds talk about the several corners of here. Those are the important regions. Of course, we can measure also the size of region of interest. This is the size for this particular photograph, and this region of interest has a bigger area. Question?
Is that determined by focus or something else? How do you know it's?
Well, there are several algorithms to detect the region of interest. Yes. Difference of contrast and other things, color difference and so on. Yeah. The other thing is so-called the simplicity of a photograph. In this one, is there's a single object, quite clear. But this one has a lot of patterns, line patterns. This one we have vertical lines. This one we have elliptical shapes. But all of this has been considered as, in some cases, beautiful features. And texture, different texture. And focus, and of course in this case, non-focus, blurry, and so on. Depth of field. A very focused object, but at the background it's a blurred region. Color harmony. We follow a paper done by Cohen Orr at SIGGRAPH 206. Contrast. Yeah, this one has a strong contrast as compared to this one. And for personal preference, we consider, for example, color. Sometimes some of the people prefer blue color over red color or over green color. It's personal preference. And some people prefer more like a black and white features. And some of the people would prefer portrait from a photograph. But anyway, once we have provided this around 20 different features, then we can use a machine learning to predict a label for each data. Then we can use the predicted the scores to re-rank the photographs. Now, for the learning algorithm, there are several different ones. We know that one is called, for example, support vector machines. The other one we are trying to use is called a deep convolution network, or deep neural network, DNN. But here we're going to use so-called listnet or radio basis function plus listnet as our learning algorithm. Oh, I'll try to skip over the technical details of so-called the listnet. Okay, now comes to the so-called personalized ranking. We try to give a score for each photograph after prediction, but considering so-called personal preference. We designed 3 different methods or 3 different user interfaces for this personalized ranking. The first one is so-called feature-based. That is, we mentioned about 20 different features. We provide a slider for each feature, so you can determine whether you like a more simple photograph or more more object. And we provide the second one is so-called example-based. The third one is so-called list-based. I'm going to introduce it a little bit later. So feature-based is that we can provide a weight for each feature. And the score is scaled according to the feature strength. That is, according to the slider of it. Now, this is I can show a video here. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So within the video, you will see that first of all, we have a lot of in this case, we have more than 10,000 photographs from Flickr or from Photo Challenge site. Then here on the right part, at the right part, there will be a lot of features here, such as rule of thirds and clarity, and even the color, red, green, blue, and black and white, and simplicity, and so on. So that is, you toward the right, you choose a bigger value. Toward the left, you choose a smaller value. After you select all the features, then we can have to re-rank all the photographs according to this feature. So this is the first method. The second one is so-called example-based. Remember that in the first approach, it's too difficult for each user to select among this about 20 features. You have to determine the strength of each one, or the weighting of each one. So the next one, we think maybe we can simplify this problem by just give a few samples that you like. For example, if I just choose 3 of the pictures here, that I think it's, it's my personal preference. And then we let the machine to learn the good features inside, all the common features inside these 3 photographs, and then use the learned features to re-rank all the other photographs. So, so this is a videotape of the system. In this system, we try to select just a few photographs. The first one, the second one, and perhaps the third one later. So once we have a set of examples that we think it's good examples, then the system will try to learn all the common features inside and re-rank the whole set of photographs according to this your personal preference. Okay, the third one is so-called list-based method. We consider, well, in this example, we just consider the photographs that we like, that we consider it's good. How about the bad ones that we dislike or that we don't like? We try to give a few more examples. That is consider not just the positive feedback, but also the negative feedback. So it's called list-based method. That is, for example, we don't like this kind of photographs, but we like the above ones. So we give scores to the examples here, the good ones, the bad ones, and then we can use this to re-rank the whole pictures again. So here is the videotape. In this case, if we choose a photograph, not just to choose it, but we also had to give our preference. Okay. That is to preference from score 1 to score 5, whether we like it or we dislike it. So in this case, we choose about 5 to 10 photographs and give different ranking in the list. Then using this as a search index and to re-rank the whole thing again. Okay, I'm kind of running out of my time, so we just report our user study result. So we used 12,000 photographs for the learning, And for example, the top ranked result, the bottom ranked results, and so on. And there are several ways to measure to evaluate our experiment. One is so-called Kendall-Taus correlation efficient. In this case, our method has, sometimes in this case, a higher correlation coefficient as compared to other method. The other one is so-called precision recall curve, and our method, which is a green curve, appears to be one of the best. And for the other user study is that, how about one is so-called aesthetic consistency, the other one is so-called preference awareness. We get different result. For the aesthetic consistency, the user considers feature-based method the more precise one. But for the so-called preference awareness, that is whether you like it or not, then both the example-based and the list-based method has higher scores as compared to the feature-based. One of the reasons is that feature-based method, you have to learn a lot of features, but for most of our users, they don't have the knowledge or don't have the time to learn it. For example-based, it's the simplest way, just to select 3 to 5 the photographs that you like, and then so it's the most intuitive way. For the list-based method, you have to provide both the positive feedback and the negative feedback to the system, and so as a conclusion, the users prefer non-rule-based approaches such as example-based and list-based method because it's easier to use. But of course, there are limitations. We didn't re-rank the photos by semantics. Okay, that end my talk, and I would love to answer questions here. Okay. Thank you.
Questions?
Okay, over there.
I'm interested in the question, I don't know if you looked at this in the user study results, of how much variability there was in preference between the individuals. Did pretty much everybody like the same images and not like the same images?
No, it's very culture dependent. The answer will be very different for different person.
So the question was, what was the level of individual differences in people's preference? So if you can repeat the question,
okay,
we'll get it on the tape.
Okay. More questions? Okay.
One of the common killers of a good photograph is someone having their eyes closed, right? So I was just thinking about my pile of photographs, and does this method sort of allow you to discriminate that as kind of a feature, so that you could then use some rule to say, yeah, he never likes those?
Yes.
Is that something that this can pick up on?
Yes and no, but we try to learn from this process that. Oh, your question I have to repeat again. Your question is that whether we can, for personal preference, we can learn new features or different features for personal use. And the answer is yes. Our system will try to draw examples from the personal selection and to create a combination of features, say a combination of these 20 different features, and try to have new features where you cannot describe in words, but the machine will learn it from the data set. Yeah. Okay.
Rick?
Simple question, is this tool publicly available if I wanted to see if my photos are good photos?
Well, yeah. The question is the tools publicly available? Yes, it's in my personal webpage, and you can get the tool and the source code and so on. And the trouble is that when you try to compete your photograph, personal photograph, with the rest of the world, say in the Flickrs or in the photo challenge files, you may find your skills of photograph is always almost in the middle. You try to be in the top 5%, but it's extremely difficult for a person, amateurs, you know, because you are competing with all the professionals in the world. Is that okay for you? But you will find yourself.
I mean, my ego is hurt.
Yeah. But you will get, you know, in the top 1/3, perhaps. Yes. Yeah. Oh, Ron?
So Ming, what's your? I mean, how do you judge the existing commercial tools for anything related to this? I mean, whether it be selecting what kind of photos to use or putting photos in order so that you don't have to manually place. I mean, I tried to with Shutterfly. The results of my particular one sample was so horrible, I completely
True.
And
Yeah.
didn't design
Well, yeah. For your question is that how can we evaluate other commercial softwares based on these features?
Are they good, are they bad? What's the state of the art?
Yeah. The state of the art says that for commercial software or for research purpose, there in terms of so-called binary classification problem, that is whether this photograph is good or bad as compared to given two photos, is this one better than the other one? So for this kind of question, all systems achieve an accuracy of about 92 to 95%. It's okay if you are going to compare with only two photographs. But for most of the commercial software don't have the capability to consider your personal preference unless you pull the sliders, and that's too tough for ordinary users. Yeah. So that's why we want to provide so-called example-based or so-called list-based method to simplify this process.
So I am just back from vacation, and we have 1,200, 1,500.
Yes, good.
We have more. We have many slides. We have many photos.
Yes.
So a personal collection.
Yes.
Is it reasonable to do something like this with
Yes.
a personal collection?
Yes. The question is that is it
nitty gritty?
Yes. The question is that for personal collection of photographs, like you know, from our travel, and is it? Does it make sense to use this kind of tools? That's exactly my initial intention. That is, we try to classify our own photographs based on our personal preference, in order, so that in the future I can see just perhaps 1 or 2% of the good photographs of each journey. Because when I'm reaching the age of 56 this year, and when I'm looking back through my iPad, I have almost 64 gigabytes of photographs of spanning 40 years. Just to look at, for each year, I select one set of it. It would take me almost 2 hours just to browsing through it. So that's why I try to give me a glimpse of the good photos, perhaps only like 5% or 2% of the personal collections, pop up, and I just see those photographs first. Then if I'm more interested in, then I can go deep down into it.
And let me follow up with mine. How many photos do you need in a sample for this stuff to work? I mean, say, I want all my pictures we made of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And which ones are good and which ones are bad? How many do I need for this technique to work?
Yes, yeah. Your question is that for the example-based or so-called list-based method, how many photographs are needed for our input, at least?
Yep.
For example-based, we suggest 5.
Okay.
Yeah. For list-based, we suggest 10 of them. That is 5 good ones, 5 worse ones. Yeah. So you can have positive feedback and negative feedback at the same time.
And I'm less worried about closed eyes than I am of the pictures of my feet. Rich,
Just
you guys want to come up?
question. I remember somebody coming by third tech and talking to Nick about this camera classification problem in probably
Yeah.
2002. That they wanted to work on that as an investment idea.
Yes.
And then the question I think was similar to Mary's. If I wanted to find all the good shots of one of my children,
Yeah.
what would the classification across a category as opposed to good versus bad?
For your children, we're talking about portrait also. So we have to consider other features such as, like beautiful or handsome guys use other features like that. And that, it's in a different paper, but it can be done.
And
Thank you.
how about integrating textual descriptions with with your text?
Yeah.
You can do that too?
The label?
Future work, yeah.
Yes, yeah, labels, yes.
All right, so let's thank Ming again.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Give the talk, I would like to say something here. When I returned in the early from 90 to 91, returned back to Taiwan, tried to teach computer graphics and virtual reality. Then I was shocked to see that the environment there in Asian countries such as Taiwan, Japan, and Singapore, the environment is not so good as compared to here. So I was having trouble just to have, for example, very good frame buffers, the true color display system, and not to mention the head-mounted display and the
Speaker is Ming Ouhyoung, who has probably come as far as maybe not as far as Australia, but he's come from Taiwan.
Yes, yes.
He is the elder statesman of our three speakers, and we won't finished in 1990.
Yes.
Now, many of us heard stories about the Sarcos arm living under the floor when we were here. I see some nodding heads. Ming actually worked with it. And one of its problems was that it had a mind of its own, and they would go run demos, and people would come in, and this robot arm, with a lot of force, would just be swinging back and forth, and it freaked out the visitors.
Idea of virtual reality. So that's far away. Well, I'm glad to say something here that after 25 years of struggle, those Asian countries finally set up the equipment that's almost equal to what has been taught here. Good. Now, what happened? Okay. Okay. So the motivation of my talk here.
A little known fact about him. The other is that when he graduated, worked for Bell Labs for a while, went back to Taiwan, and was part of one of the first, if not the first, software startup in Taiwan, and it is still on the stock exchange.
Yes, yeah.
So we welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I can see that most of you are actually my friends during the early 1990s, so or late 80s. So I'm relaxed here to give a technical talk. Before every day we have billions of photos stored in the Facebook and in other in our personal cameras and so on. And the trouble is that every day we download a lot of our photos perhaps just by putting the time and perhaps the location into a folder, and that's all. Have you ever done anything else to do that, like making a comment? I don't think we have the time. Not to mention that